My name is Mckenna. I got my undergraduate degrees from Florida Tech in astrophysics and astrobiology, and I'm currently working on my master's degree, still in molecular biology, focusing on that space biology research. I love to talk about astrobiology because it has huge effects on the future of human spaceflight and human space exploration, but a lot of people don't really know what it is. It really didn't become a field of science until 1984, which is when it got its start. And so I just like to explain a little bit about what it is, what current research looks like, and how it's going to get us not only to Mars, but further beyond than ever imagined. So what is astrobiology? It's the study of how life began here on Earth, how it formed, how it evolves. It's the study of life as we know it, so how life looks here on Earth, what the requirements for life are, and it's also studying how that life is affected by microgravity, because that'll be pretty important if we're looking at a future in space. We're looking at life that can exist at the extreme limits of life here on Earth, those extremophile organisms that can really push the limits of what we know life to be able to withstand. And then it's also looking at exoplanets, which are planets around any star other than our sun, to figure out if they might be habitable or if they have characteristics that could allow for some other form of life to be able to exist there. The three main questions that astrobiologists are looking to answer are: how does life begin and evolve? Is there life beyond Earth? And if so, how could we possibly detect it? And what is the future of life on Earth and elsewhere in the universe? One of the biggest drawbacks in astrobiology is that we only have one example of life here on Earth. We haven't found it anywhere else, but we know that life here has a pretty specific definition. It's carbon-based, mostly requires liquid water, requires oxygen, but life somewhere else might need completely different parameters. So we're starting with what we know life to look like, and maybe along the way we'll find some other form of life. This is what kind of kick-started the entire field of astrobiology. And if you went to our keynote speaker yesterday afternoon, you will have seen this picture already. But this is the Allen Hills 84001 meteorite. It landed on Earth about 13,000 years ago and came here from Mars. It's estimated to be about 4.5 billion years old. And when people saw this meteorite, they thought that it had to be solid evidence that there was once life somewhere on Mars. And it was because of the little structures there in that top image. People thought that they looked like fossils. This had to be undeniable evidence that at one point there was life somewhere on Mars. 4.5 billion years ago, it was a much more habitable planet. It had better temperatures, it had a stronger atmosphere, it had liquid water. So this had to be proof, right? It was proven to be just another form of rock structure. It's not a fossil, unfortunately. But this got the ball rolling. People were excited, and that excitement didn't die down after this. We wanted to keep going, and even if this was maybe not the evidence that we were hoping for, that it had to be out there somewhere. So this is credited with kickstarting the entire field of astrobiology, and I personally am very grateful for that, because otherwise I might have to be an engineer. And mad respect to engineers, but I'm not built for that. So, like I mentioned, there's a pretty solid definition for life as we know it, and there are a lot of requirements for life. So that's where we kind of start when we're looking at these exoplanets. We're looking at whether or not they fit what we know to be considered a habitable planet. We look for whether or not it's located in the habitable zone, which is a region where a planet or a moon is not too far, but not too close to its star. This is because we need liquid water to be present. So the temperature can't be too hot, can't be too cold. There has to be able to be liquid water for at least some part of the year of this planet or moon. But then we also have to look at the UV radiation. And this is the radiation that this planet will take in from its star. You know, here on Earth, we do receive radiation from the sun. Our atmosphere protects us from a lot of it, but we receive a good amount of radiation. And that's what can kickstart the biomolecule formation. So this is the formation of molecules such as DNA, RNA, proteins, the stuff that makes life, life. And if you don't have that initial burst of energy to kickstart those reactions, you won't get the formation of those molecules, you won't have life. But if you get too much radiation, that will kill all of those molecules. So there has to be a very tricky balance. That's why this is also called the Goldilocks zone. Goldilocks, story of her and the three bears, she was very particular. So that's how life is. It's very particular. We also look at the size in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere here on Earth is what protects us from a lot of that radiation. This does not mean you don't need to wear sunscreen. Please still wear sunscreen. But if we went somewhere like Mars, where there isn't much of an atmosphere, less than 1%, sunscreen wouldn't do you any good. There's way too much radiation, and no matter how much SPF 5000 you put on, it's probably not going to do anything. So we have to make sure that the planet has enough mass to be able to hold the gravity in to hold an atmosphere, because that's how we protect that planet. So if a planet is too small, it doesn't have the mass necessary, we're not going to get that same protective atmosphere. And then finally, we look for the presence of what we call the essential elements, the fundamental building blocks of life. And these are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And these are those elements that make up those fundamental building blocks, the DNA, RNA, molecules such as those. So if we don't see those present in the atmosphere or in the area around this planet, we're not likely to see habitability. And then we go to extremophiles. So this is coming back to life here on Earth and looking at what can exist at the very limits of what we know life to be able to withstand. My personal favorite animal is a tardigrade, or a water bear. This is a microanimal, and it is the only known organism able to withstand direct exposure to space. So you can kind of see a lot of the stats on how much this little guy can withstand. They're pretty durable. They can take a lot. So life that we might be able to find somewhere elsewhere in the universe might look more like this. It might be much smaller than humans, and it might be a lot more durable. So we might not be able to find anything that's quite as complex as humanity, but there are different limits of life depending on what you're looking at. And then we come to this pink blob here that is a bacteria species called Deinococcus radiodurans, and it is the most radiation-resistant form of bacteria known to man. This bacteria can withstand 28,000 times more radiation than a human can withstand, meaning that it could likely withstand the radiation levels that we see on Mars. So then finally, I like to talk about cyanobacteria because human life has been here for a relatively short time. And cyanobacteria is one of the organisms that's credited with really driving the evolution of life because it began oxygenic photosynthesis, producing all that oxygen that led to the Great Oxygenation Event, which I'll talk about more in a second, and created a lot more evolution and diversity. So this might be more like the type of life that we're looking for if we're able to find life on another planet. A little bit about the origins of life here on Earth. So we start off 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth forms. And then 2.4 billion years ago, we have that cyanobacteria, the Great Oxygenation Event. All of a sudden, the atmosphere, which didn't have very much oxygen at all of a sudden has all this oxygen. And there's a lot of electrons, a lot more energy, this source for organisms to be able to take in that energy and undergo more complex cellular processes. So life was able to diversify. And then 530 million years ago, we have the Cambrian explosion, which is classified as the most intense diversification of life here on Earth. And then all the way down 300,000 years ago, we have humans. So when we're thinking about life on another planet, humans have been here for a relatively very short time. Life, as we know it right now, is not necessarily likely to be the kind of life that we might find somewhere else. So we have to keep that in mind. We have to keep in mind every single stage of evolution from all the way back at that 4.5 billion years ago formation of Earth. There's a lot to consider with astrobiology. We look at biosignatures, and these are objects or patterns that specifically require a biological agent to produce them. So anything that really formed through biological activity. And so this crystal is an example of a biosignature. It's called a magnetite crystal, and this is actually taken from that same meteorite that I showed you earlier, that ALH 84001. And I like this one because this type of crystal is formed through biological processes. This type of bacteria called magnetotactic bacteria, which you can see right there next to it, will produce this type of crystal through its cellular processes. And there is an assay, a test that we can do for these crystals here on Earth to determine if it was created through biological origins. There are 6 criteria to this test, and they found that 25% of the crystals that were found in this meteorite from Mars fit all 6 criteria. So even if there weren't fossils in this meteorite, maybe it still has a few other things that we can study. It definitely doesn't count out the idea of life having once been present on Mars. So I mentioned exoplanets, but we're not stuck just looking outside of our solar system. There are a few places in our solar system that we are looking for life, and that could potentially be habitable for at least some form of life. One of those is Mars. So it once had an atmosphere and liquid water, like I mentioned, and there's a lot of hope for biosignatures with that. The Perseverance rover is currently looking through the Jezero crater, collecting those biosamples. the Mars sample return mission has been canceled for now. Hopefully it will be picked up eventually, but that would be a great way to be able to really understand what it looks like there, that in situ, that on-site resources. So this is another test. So even if we're not able to go to Mars quite yet, we're able to use analogs here on Earth. And these are structures that might be similar or environments that might be similar to environments found on Mars. One study was done in 2024 to test whether or not the polar ice present on Mars could be still viable for organisms to undergo photosynthesis. And this test did show that even with different levels of dust content, different thicknesses of ice, it is still possible for photosynthesis to occur. So if there is some type of life present, maybe under the ice, it could still be thriving even in that environment. And this was performed testing it compared to ice levels in Greenland. So that's similar enough to the ice on Mars that we can still get a pretty good idea of what that viability might look like. We look at other moons, such as Europa and Enceladus. These are moons of Jupiter and Saturn, to see that they both have subsurface oceans. They have ice layers that are able to shield them from radiation, even if they don't have that strong atmosphere to protect them. Tidal heating from Jupiter. So there's a few things there that lead us to believe there might be some viability there. Same thing with Titan. You also have those subsurface oceans. You have surface hydrocarbons, and this is rich in organic compounds. So again, just some more signs that there might be some form of life that could be cohesive for this environment. We come to Venus, our sister planet. We don't think that there's going to be life present on the surface. It is a very, very hostile environment. But we do have a temperate band in that upper atmosphere. And this band has a pretty viable range of temperatures. It's not too hot, not too cold. And it also has phosphine gas. This is another one of those biosignatures that can be produced through living organisms. So it may be some other type of life that we have no clue what it looks like, but it could be there. Never say never. And then talking about the moon, just because, here in just a couple weeks, we're getting ready to go back to the moon. And we want to look at this for a lot of reasons when it comes to astrobiology. It's a more efficient launch pad. It has 1/6 of the gravity. It has nowhere near an atmosphere. So if we're looking at launching from the moon, if we're able to create a launch pad there, it's going to be a lot easier to get further away places such as Mars. We also will be able to do much better long-term microgravity studies. Because here on Earth, I don't know if you've noticed, but there is gravity. So if you're trying to see how things work without gravity, it's not the best place for it. But if we're able to create a lunar habitat, do some long-term studies, we'll not only better understand how plants could work and how human health in general could be affected by that long-term spaceflight. And then moving outside of our solar system, we're looking at exoplanets, any planets that are around any other star or moons around another star, to see if any of them are similar enough to Earth to be considered habitable, kind of an Earth 2.0. As of right now, Kepler 452b is thought to be the most similar to Earth. We haven't found any life yet, but we have definitely found planets that are very similar to Earth. But there are a lot of challenges when it comes to long-term spaceflight. There's insane levels of radiation that you're going to be taking in. There's isolation and confinement, distance from Earth, gravity fields, a lot of issues that will affect with astronauts' mental health. There's closed environments, and plant growth is a big issue. So why do we want to risk it? Why is this something that we're even considering if there's so much that could go wrong? And I love this quote from NASA astronaut Frank Borman: "Exploration really is the essence of the human spirit, and to pause, to falter, to turn our back on the quest for knowledge is to perish." Humans have always been explorers, and that hasn't changed. We went from wanting to explore every square inch of the land to every drop of water in the ocean, and now we're looking at the stars. And this is not a new idea. Humans since the beginning of time have looked up and wondered what else was out there. Now we're just closer to being able to go there ourselves. And that's why we outweigh the risks. That's why, even with all these challenges, we think we can do this. We have the capability, we have the technology. If we don't have it yet, we're going to figure it out. And so part of my work is looking at plant growth in space. And there's a lot of challenges to this, but we need to find a way for astronauts to be able to provide for themselves, grow their own food, grow their own crops. We can't really take enough to last potentially a 3-year mission. That's gonna be way too much weight for the aircraft. It's not really a feasible idea. And then once we get there, that's a 3-year mission that we're looking at. We're not gonna be able to just keep sending new supply missions. We have to figure out a way to make this a viable option. But plants in space, they're faced not only with disorientation from that microgravity, they don't really know which way is up or which way is down. They're taking in a ton of radiation, and water behaves very differently. Seeing this video of astronaut Chris Hadfield, he's Canadian, but I don't hold that against him, kind of demonstrating how water behaves when it comes to space. Here on Earth, water has surface tension, and the gravity here on Earth will break apart that surface tension. It'll break those molecules apart, so that way it doesn't clump together. Kind of like if you're filling up a cup and you see it kind of bubble up over the lid because it wants to stick together. In space, you don't have that gravity to pull it apart. So water is going to behave like this, almost more like a gel. And you're going to see this kind of situation where there's almost bubbles. The water won't move through the plant the way it needs to, and you're not going to get viable plant growth. We also want to look at in situ resource utilization. And this is utilization of the dirt that's already present on the moon, on Mars, anywhere else that we might decide to go, figuring out how to make it viable for plant growth. Because it doesn't have any organic material, because there's no life there as far as we know. So if we're able to figure out a way to use that dirt that's already there, that's so much less when it comes to the resources we'll have to take with us. And if we can do that, again, that's making space travel a lot more feasible. My research is looking at plant growth promoting bacteria. So this is a study of how bacteria can help plants grow. Here on Earth, when plants are faced with a really stressful environment, they'll use symbiotic relationships with plants or with bacteria to be able to overcome those stressors, whether that's taking in more nutrients, loosening their cell walls so they can grow better roots, or anything along those lines. So if plants can do that here on Earth, why not have the same effect in space? We know that there is bacteria on the ISS. We found it in the veggie unit. I mean, humans are really petri dishes of bacteria. Anywhere we go, there's going to be bacteria. So why not use that to our advantage? So I won't read all of this. I know that's a lot of text, but just a few of the interactions that we see with that plant growth promoting bacteria. And we're trying to see if those bacteria can still improve plant growth, even if they've been affected by space radiation. So here's a little bit of what I did last year. This image right here is the plants that were not inoculated with any bacteria. And this image with the much healthier looking plants is the plants that were inoculated with bacteria. So we have 3 species of bacteria taken from the ISS, thank you Kennedy Space Center, and we inoculated plant seeds with them, which is to say we just soaked them in a liquid culture of the bacteria for about 6 hours and then let them grow. And we found that when the plants had this bacteria to help them with their environment, they grew way better. Their roots were significantly longer. They were healthier overall. They had more leaves. They were greener in color. They had longer roots, more roots. Really, overall, they were much healthier. So this shows that this is potentially a very viable option for future human spaceflight. And then we ended up testing it in regolith, which is the more colorful graph down here. And regolith is a very difficult thing to grow plants in. This is that simulated Martian dirt or lunar dirt. And again, there's no organic matter. Plants don't really want to grow in it. But we did see that there was an increase in the plant growth that we were able to see when we added the bacteria to the plants. So that's just kind of as brief as possible overview of what astrobiology is, how it's helping with the future of human spaceflight, and how plant growth promoting bacteria really could be a very feasible idea on how we can improve plant growth for astronauts when it comes to long-term human spaceflight missions. Thank you all for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.